Hello, this is PJ Capozzi, Superintendent of Schools, going through the FY21 budget presentation. What you'll see in this PowerPoint presentation and voiceover is an examination of the processes we use and the data that supports the decisions that we make in terms of expenditures, and an explanation of how we secure the revenues that we do for our district. Let's start with a review of the overall data. The most important number that we focus on as a school district and through the Board of Education is our operating reserves at the end of the year. This is one of the only areas that we have strict fiscal policies set, saying that we will not dip below 25% of the operating reserves available for us. That is because the uneven nature of revenue collection for school finance, anything under 25%, is at the point where we have to consider taking out tax anticipation warrants. Basically, or translated, that means that we would take out loans in order to pay the bills. When the referendum was passed, we were right about 25 or 26%, and you can see there's been a steady increase throughout the course of the last several years. In FY20, you will notice that that number trends down. The reason for that is that we are short around $3 million in revenue as a result of the delay of tax payments being collected as a result of COVID. That doesn't mean anything to the district in terms of structure, workflow, anything to that regard, because we're in a healthy financial position. That tax payment will just come through in the next fiscal year. But given that we report our data on a fiscal year, it does give a significant blip in the radar as we examine it. Here you can see the percentages. We will be between 67 and 69% at the time of creating this presentation. We're at 69%. There's a couple expenditures we're looking at in terms of making in order to open schools successfully that might drop that down to 67% at the end of this fiscal year. As you can see, that is a healthy number compared to where we were, and we've been steady for the last several years. If you look historically through where we've come from as a district, we have really interesting surplus and deficit numbers. Meaning that when you look at just the end of the year total, or to get published in the audit, some years it looks like we're just really flush with cash, and other years it looks like we're running a large deficit. And it's been very interesting because there hasn't been really a lot of consistency in the county or through the state, so that these numbers become so jumbled for us. You will see that if you look back in FY15, we received 3 tax payments, meaning we typically get 2 payments from the county in order to support our efforts. We get one in June, and we get one in September. The year of FY15, we received our payment in July, a payment in September, and then another payment in June. So it looked like in FY15 we had this amazing year, and we had a good financial year, but just not as good as it was. We had ended up receiving those 3 payments in that fiscal year. Now, again, whether we receive that payment in the last day of June or the first day of July, in terms of operationally, it doesn't mean anything. In terms of how the audit looks, it's significant. In FY16, we bonded around $10 million in order to do the projects that we did that summer. Then in FY17, we spent it. So it looked like we had an amazing FY16 and a horrible FY17. That was just, we received the money in June, expended the money in July, so it happened on different fiscal years. FY18, we got very lucky. The state switched from an attendance model of funding schools to an enrollment. And even though we have good attendance, our enrollment is obviously higher. So we received a little bit tick up in terms of what we were doing there. In FY19, we received 5% short of what we anticipated in terms of tax revenue from Ogle County in the June payment. So again, across a fiscal year, when we levy, we get one of the payments in June, one in September. So our June payment was short, which just simply means that whatever we get in June is not necessarily 50%. It's just what the county has received at that time. And so whatever we miss in the June payment, we make up again in the September payment. So it doesn't impact us in terms of operations because we are not running on that tight of a budget. But when we're budgeting and saying we're going to get money in, it negatively impacts how we look at that point. This year, with the extension of the tax payment deadline, we were significantly short. So we're about $3 million short. So FY20 looks really poor. FY21 looks artificially inflated. This in FY21, the budget that I'm asking the board to pass in September, will be the first time that we pass a deficit, should be passing a deficit budget since I've been here. And that's as a result of all of the COVID related expenditures. We won't be, however, because that revenue that we didn't get in FY20 is going to flow through in 21. So again, FY20 was a good budget year in theory, and it looks bad. And FY21 is going to be a deficit budget year, but it's going to look good just the way the tax payments hit. I know it's very confusing, but I just want to be transparent. As you can see, this slide is extremely busy. What we try to do is give you as much detail as possible so that you can understand where we're at. Everything that you see in terms of FY20 is still unaudited. The audit will conclude in the coming weeks. We'll have precise numbers, although we're very confident that these numbers are very close. So you'll see that this spreadsheet that's moved over onto a PowerPoint slide takes you through the FY20 year, and then it shows you where we're projected to be in terms of FY21. For those of you that want to know how we actually create the budget, there's two separate but related processes. One is revenue. That's the money that we receive both from the state and from local property tax. That deals with a lot of guesswork. The expenditures are more time bound and we can make a pretty scientific guess. And typically we're pretty close. So last year in a $19 million budget, we're within like $60,000 total of hitting exactly what we projected to do. Obviously revenues are a little bit more. The reason expenditures are more scientific is because we can control that. We allow our budget to match our priorities, and then we have some hard numbers, like we know what people are going to get in terms of their salary. There's some numbers that are a little bit more fluid, like we project, for instance, what we're going to spend on our electric bill based on historical data, and we can have a pretty good model for that. But if it's an exceptionally hot or cold summer or winter, then those numbers vary slightly. Revenue. The tax payments are, again, based on the total EAV. So there's two things that can happen correspondingly at the same time. We can have our revenue increase and our tax rate decrease based on the EAV that's going on, and that's what occurred this year. So we are securing more money with a lower tax rate. So for some of you, you're paying more even though the rate is lower. That just means that your property value has increased. General state aid, or also known as EBF, the evidence-based funding formula, this year was held constant. So whatever we got last year is what we're going to get this year as a result of COVID. Then we have different grants and we secure some money through fees and other miscellaneous revenue. Again, we control expenditure, so that's what I focus on. If we have good internal fiscal controls, our expenditure should be largely what we project and or accounting for large items that happen to fail. So like if a boiler fails, our budget's going to be poor, but that's a very easy to explain, like, hey, our budget's off $1.2 million because we spent $1.18 million on a boiler. State funding has changed, and it's been good. So we did a good job of complaining about the state and what they did to fund schools for years. Lately, the state has done a pretty good job. The evidence-based funding formula is something that we support as a district and has been good to us. This year, instead of getting an increase like we projected, though, we're projecting about $150,000 to $180,000 increase. Instead, we were held flat as a result of COVID and the lack of revenue coming in at the state level for them to redistribute down to. I want to explain the funds really quickly to you, just so that you, when we're talking about Fund 10 and 20 and you look back at those charts, it makes a little bit. Fund 10 is anything that deals with education. So when you think about teacher salary, anything that goes into helping your students learn. So technology, hotspots, software programs, all of that falls under Fund 10. Our max rate of the levy in Fund 10 is 3.48, and that was increased by the referendum. I think what we have found is that we can operate as a really successful school district with that referendum. Without that referendum, we'd have to fundamentally shift what we do and provide less service for our kids. So that's why you'll see us this year go back out for that referendum. Again, not to increase the tax rate, just to maintain it from what it is now ad infinitum. Fund 20. What we receive in terms of revenues, and we get 0.5 on a tax levy, and then we use a lot of money that we could be using in education to move over into buildings and grounds, simply because 0.5 doesn't create enough revenue in order to support what we're doing in trying to maintain healthy, safe facilities. This is, again, independent of doing any large projects. Large projects we either have to fund based on where we're at in revenue, that we have to bond for that, or we have to look at health, life, safety as the revenue. Fund 30 is our credit card debt, essentially. So whatever we need to pay in debt, we automatically are able to levy for. That calculation is done at the county clerk's level. It allows us to do large projects, such as the house life safety project that we took care of. Fund 40 is transportation. This is where we levy and we get our money from a transportation report we send to the state. They reimburse us at cents on the dollar for what we expend in transportation, so that we can provide free transportation for any student outside of a mile radius. Fund 50 is retirement for non-certified employees. So this is IMRF and Social Security. Again, we can levy whatever we want in this. This is one of the areas we've been systematically levying less than we expend each year because we have a balance in there that we're trying to spend down. So we're decreasing the tax rate intentionally in order to spend this down to get it closer to zero in Fund 50. Fund 60 is not a taxable fund. That is our impact fees. So as houses go up in the area, this is what is paid to municipalities and flows through to school. We receive very, very little funding in this. Fund 70 is working cash. This is, again, we have the ability with working cash to kind of distribute it to any fund as we need it. We've been very conservative with working cash since I've been here, truly making it kind of our rainy day fund. Fund 80 is tort and liability. So this is anything that we do to help our district with risk management. We pass a risk management plan, which is vetted by our lawyers each year. We have the ability to levy up to $1 million plus. In here, again, we choose to do roughly half that, a little more than half of that, as a result of trying to be as fiscally conservative as possible and take care of our tax. And then Fund 90 is health, life, safety. When every 10 years we have to have a survey done, anything that's out of code in our schools on the date that it was constructed. So if I have a railing from 1933, it has to meet 1933 code, that we get essentially fined by the architect / ROE, and then we have to replace that. This is our fund to support that. The issue is that what we were able to tax on this is so low that it never ends up being adequate. So if we have to do those repairs, that's when we typically go out to bond in order to do those large facilities issues. As always, anyone that would like to connect or get deeper detail into this, I am available. That is my cell phone and my email. Thank you very much for listening to this. Make it a great day.